Ah yes, the magnificent Trolley Sourbright Crawler, also known as Trollicus brightolus. The worm's captivating neon colour makes it an easy, gummy prey.
Trolley!
It's a surprisingly sour, invitingly chewy, staggeringly snackable species unlike anything else found on this planet.
Eat me!
Delicious. Visit Trolley.com to shop now.
Trolley, eat me!
This series contains adult language and depictions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised. Most of the possession stories that I cover in this podcast are cloaked in Catholic dogma. The exorcists are priests, the victims are faithful Catholics, and the method of exorcising those demons comes from Scripture. Or, more likely, from the Exorcism Handbook, the Ritual Romanum, which I've mentioned several times. But as we all know by now, every religion has possession myths, and they all share some pretty basic similarities. But the one religion that I haven't covered yet that I've wanted to for a while is Voodoo. And man, there are a bunch of crazy stories concerning voodoo possessions. So let's get into it. Welcome back to The Devil Within. You're listening to the Zombification of Felicia Felix-Mentor. In the heart of the Caribbean, nestled between the Azure Sea and the imposing mountains, lies the island of Hispaniola. A land shaped by the collision of cultures, the violent sweep of history, and the lingering mysteries of the unknown. To the west of this island, the Republic of Haiti occupies a land steeped in magic and mysticism, where the old world meets the new in a cacophony of life and death, belief and survival. To outsiders, Haiti has always been a place of contradictions, a country where poverty, natural disasters, and political instability are met by a resilience born of a complex history. The Haitian Revolution, one of the most extraordinary events in the history of the Western Hemisphere. If you're not familiar with it, you should read up. The Haitian Revolution saw enslaved Africans rise against the greatest military powers of the time and establish the first Black Republic. But beneath this revolutionary zeal lay another, more subtle force. A force that would captivate and terrify generations of observers. The practice of voodoo, a religion born of the marriage between African spiritual traditions, Catholicism, and the deep, ancient beliefs in the supernatural. At the center of voodoo lies an understanding of life and death that defies Western rationality. It's a world in which the spirits, or the Iwa, walk among the living, guiding, protecting, and sometimes possessing those who call upon them. But it's also a world where death is not necessarily the end, where the boundary between life and the grave is thin, and where the stories of zombies, or soulless bodies reanimated by powerful sorcerers known as bakors, are whispered in the shadows. Among the countless stories that have emerged from Haiti's enigmatic religious traditions, few have captured the imagination like the case of Felicia Felix-Mentor. Her story, often shrouded in the fog of rumor and legend, is one of resurrection, of an impossible return from the dead, and of the haunting notion that even in death, one may not find peace. It's a story that speaks not only to the mystery of voodoo, but to the deeper questions of life and death, identity, and the haunting legacy of slavery and colonialism that has shaped Haiti for centuries. To understand the story of Felicia Felix-Mentor, one must first understand the country into which she was born. Haiti, at the turn of the 20th century, was still grappling with the aftermath of its revolution and the complexities of being an independent Black nation in a world dominated by European colonial powers. The Haitian Revolution had been a singularly brutal event, fought not only against French colonists, but against the deeply ingrained systems of slavery and exploitation that had made the island one of the most profitable colonies in the world. The victory, however, had come at a steep cost. The infrastructure of the country had been shattered, and the new government, under constant threat from foreign powers, struggled to maintain stability. Yet amid this political and social upheaval, the religious life of the Haitian people remained vibrant and central to their existence. The practice of voodoo, though often maligned by outsiders as mere superstition or black magic, was an integral part of the social and cultural fabric of the nation. For the people of Haiti, voodoo was more than just a religion. It was a way of life, a system through which they understood their world, their history, and their future. It was voodoo that had given the enslaved Africans the spiritual strength to fight their oppressors, and it was voodoo that continued to provide solace and protection in the face of ongoing hardship. At the heart of voodoo is the belief in the interconnectedness of the living and the dead. The Iwa, spirits who embody the forces of nature and our ancestors, act as intermediaries between the physical world and the spiritual realm. They can be called upon for guidance, protection, healing. However, not all interactions with the spirit world are benign. The darker side of voodoo involves the use of sorcerers or bakors, practitioners who wield the power to manipulate the spirits for malevolent purposes. It is within this shadowy domain that the concept of zombification emerges, where a bakor can, through rituals and potions, reanimate the dead and turn them into soulless servants. The case of Felicia Felix-Mentor would become one of the most famous examples of this dark art. A woman thought to be long dead who suddenly reappeared, wandering the streets in a dazed and disoriented state, a living embodiment of the zombie myth that had so long captivated and horrified the outside world. Felicia Felix-Mentor was born in the rural countryside of northern Haiti, a place where the rhythms of life were governed by the cycles of the harvest and the rituals of voodoo. Like many Haitians, she lived in a world that balanced precariously between the old ways and the encroaching influence of the modern world. Her family, though not wealthy, was respected in their community, and they maintained a strong connection to the land and the spirits that inhabited it. In 1907, however, tragedy struck. Felicia fell ill with a mysterious fever, one that resisted the remedies of both the local healers and the Catholic priests. Her family watched helplessly as her condition worsened. She slipped into unconsciousness and, after several days of agony, was pronounced dead by the village doctor. Her family, grief-stricken, buried her in the small cemetery outside of town, performing the appropriate rites to ensure that her spirit would find peace in the afterlife. For years, Felicia's name was rarely spoken. Her death, though tragic, was not unusual in a land where illness and poverty often claimed lives far too early. But in 1936, nearly 3 decades after her burial, something extraordinary happened. In the town of Ennery, not far from where Felicia had lived and died, a strange woman appeared, wandering the streets in a state of confusion. Her clothes were tattered, her body emaciated, and her eyes wide with fear and bewilderment. The townspeople at first didn't recognize her, but as she moved through the village, older residents began to whisper among themselves. Could it be? No, it wasn't possible. But the resemblance was undeniable. The woman, though aged and gaunt, looked like Felicia Felix-Mentor. Soon, word spread that the dead woman had returned. The woman who wandered into Enery in 1936 was indeed identified as Felicia Felix-Mentor, despite having been declared dead nearly 30 years earlier. Her family, still living in the area, was called to identify her, and to their shock, they confirmed that this was indeed the woman they had buried all those years ago. But the Felicia who had returned was not the same woman they had known in life. She was distant, unable to communicate coherently, and seemed to exist in a fog of confusion and fear. Her skin was pale and ashen, her body frail and malnourished, and her movements were slow and deliberate, as though she were unsure of how to move in the world of the living. The townspeople were horrified and fascinated in equal measure. In a land where the line between life and death was already very, very thin, the idea that a woman could be resurrected and that she could walk among the living after so many years in the grave seemed both miraculous and terrifying. The word zombie was whispered among the villagers, and soon the story spread beyond Enery, reaching the ears of journalists, doctors, and scholars who were eager to uncover the truth behind this bizarre and unsettling case. The case of Felicia Felix-Mentor attracted the attention of Dr. Louis P. Mars, a prominent Haitian ethnologist and psychiatrist who had dedicated much of his life to studying the intersection of voodoo and mental illness. Mars was intrigued by the idea of zombification, not as a supernatural phenomenon, but as a cultural and psychological construct that could be explained through science. To understand the phenomenon that confronted Dr. Mars, we must delve into the Haitian belief in zombification, a concept that has long held sway in the island's folklore. In voodoo, a zombie is not a flesh-eating creature of Hollywood horror films, but rather a person who's been stripped of their soul, rendered into a state of living death. The belief holds that a bokor, a sorcerer who practices black magic, can use powerful poisons to induce a death-like state in a victim, allowing them to be buried alive. Once the victim is exhumed, they're revived, but without their soul. So they become a zombie, a being who exists in a state of perpetual subjugation to the bokor's will. The process of zombification is deeply rooted in the voodoo belief that the soul is comprised of two parts: the gros bon ange, or the big good angel, which represents the essence of a person's individuality, and the petit bon ange, the little good angel, which governs a person's consciousness and will. When a person dies, the gros bon ange departs for Guinea, the land of the dead, while the petit bon ange remains for a time near the body, lingering in the physical world before it too moves on. The bokor is said to capture the little angel before it can leave, trapping it in a bottle or jar, and thus controlling the victim's body. Without this little angel, the zombie is left without free will, a shell of a person who can be controlled and manipulated by the bokor for nefarious purposes. Dr. Mars, ever the rationalist, was quick to dismiss the idea that Felicia had literally risen from the dead. He proposed a more scientific explanation, one that took into account both the cultural beliefs of the region and the medical knowledge of the time. According to Dr. Mars, Felicia was not a zombie in the supernatural sense, but rather the victim of a complex psychological and chemical process, one that had induced a state of catatonia, leading her to be misidentified as dead and later revived under conditions that left her disoriented and traumatized. Central to Dr. Mars's hypothesis was the idea that Felicia had been subjected to a combination of psychological manipulation and powerful neurotoxins, likely administered by a sorcerer or a bokor. The key ingredient in this process, he theorized, was a substance derived from the pufferfish, known locally as fugu. The pufferfish contains a potent neurotoxin called tetrodotoxin, which can cause paralysis and a drastic reduction in heart rate and respiration, making it appear as though the victim has died. In small, carefully measured doses, the toxin could induce a death-like state, fooling even experienced medical practitioners. Once buried, the victim would later be exhumed by the Bakor and revived. But the trauma of the experience, combined with the lingering effects of the neurotoxin, would leave the victim in a state of extreme suggestibility and confusion. In this state, the victim might believe that they had truly died and been resurrected as a zombie, especially if they were familiar with the cultural narratives surrounding zombification. But Dr. Mars knew that the explanation could not be purely chemical. The power of belief, he argued, was just as important as the poison itself. In a culture where the fear of zombification was deeply ingrained, the mere suggestion that one had been turned into a zombie could be enough to induce the psychological symptoms associated with the condition. The mind, he believed, could be as much a tool of the Bakor as the poison. Felicia, then, was not a ghost or an undead creature, but a woman who had been psychologically and chemically manipulated into believing she was no longer fully alive. The scars on her body, the vacant expression in her eyes, and her disoriented movements were all signs of the trauma she had endured. Trauma that had taken her away from her family and her community for nearly 3 decades. Despite Dr. Mars's effort to provide a rational explanation for Felicia's condition, the people of Enery were not so easily convinced. For them, the return of Felicia Felix-Mentor was proof that the world of the spirits was real and that the power of the Bakor could not be easily dismissed. They had seen with their own eyes the woman who had been dead and buried for nearly 30 years walking among them once again. And no amount of scientific reasoning could change what they knew in their hearts to be true. In the years that followed, Felicia's story became a symbol of the enduring power of Haitian folklore and the complex relationship between life, death, and the unseen forces that govern both. Whether she was truly a zombie or the victim of a cruel and elaborate deception mattered little to the people of Haiti. What mattered was the story itself. A story that reminded them that in their world, the boundary between the living and the dead was never as clear-cut as it seemed. And so, Felicia Felix-Mentor's tale became woven into the fabric of Haitian life, a story passed down from generation to generation, whispered around the fire, and invoked in times of uncertainty. In a land where the spirits of the ancestors walk among the living, and where the dead are never truly gone, the mystery of Felicia's zombification remains a potent reminder of the power of belief and the enduring enigma of life after death. The Devil Within is an EVO production, recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. Written and produced by Brandon Morgan, executive produced by Danny Abelson. For The Devil Within, I'm your host, Brandon Morgan. Thanks for listening. Make sure you're following The Devil Within wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. You could also check out our socials at The Devil Within Pod on Instagram, Facebook, and now there are full episodes available on our YouTube. Thanks again. Until next time, stay safe out there.